So before we start, I want to discuss a little bit about next week, right? Since Wednesday, we cannot have class in the morning. I prefer if we schedule it, so that because like it's gonna be very hard to find time, right? If I cannot have that time slot, then it's gonna be extremely hard for me to find any day, because like you guys, we're only doing 3 days a week, right? If I have to find more time, it means that you have to do 4 days a week later. That's not good, I think, right? You don't want to see me 4 times a week, I would guess. So I would prefer if we can reschedule it. How is the schedule for Wednesday afternoon next week? Next week, next Wednesday afternoon. Do you have class? Do you have anything? No, we do not want no class. So, huh? Okay, so can we change the time from morning to afternoon next Wednesday? Okay. You you three in the back, are you okay? No, mean not okay.
Yeah, then on my be an activity. An activity complete before we do my thing.
Yeah, the question is, do you have activities? What activity do you have?
It's like 30 so far.
What about Thursdays?
We have
But this means I have to reschedule it, right? At some point. No, Thursday, typically, this will be full. Let me see. Yeah, the room is fully booked on Thursday. So if you, I don't have to do, if I have to do Wednesday, then I mean, I have to do the weekend, which I don't want to do it. Is it mandatory that you have to go? Same activity?
Yes.
So Wednesday is.
Yeah.
Pretty fun.
Yeah.
And already registered.
Hmm.
I think others will be already registered.
No, Thursday is booked, there's no room here. Why don't I record the lecture? And I expect you to watch it, and we will discuss. So it will be a flipped classroom. You watch the lecture, and we will discuss on Friday. I expect everyone to watch the lecture beforehand, okay? All right. Okay, so I will record our lecture, and you guys watch it, and then we will discuss on Friday. Okay, because yeah, as I mentioned, I think since we have to meet like 3 times a week, it's gonna be hard to find any other time to reschedule. Okay, where are the two more people? Where are the other two? No. No, it's okay. No, now I mean, like, where are the other two people? อีก2 คนไปไหน? Okay, as I mentioned, right, for the quiz, I want to accommodate the people who for taking another course, this means that if I have the quiz, it's either it's going to be on Friday, like this time, or it's going to be Monday, Wednesday, between 8:30 to 9 a.m. Okay, so you guys 5 to 5, you have no excuse anymore, right? You have to attend 8:30 to 9 on Monday and Wednesday. Okay, if I have quiz, it will be that time. If not, then yeah, no quiz. Anything else? Yeah. One more. So, I will work on lecture. And I expect you guys to watch it yourself, right? And then we will discuss on Friday. Okay. Okay, wait, let me make sure that I still remember your name. Neeraj, not here. Made, Song Point, not here too. Lúc Angun. What's your nickname? Huh? Lung. Lung. Ah. Benyapha. What's your nickname? Mew. MEW. Okay. Thanawat. Okay. I just realized that we have 4 Thanawat, right? In this. Yeah, this is also a Thanawat Ivan. Do you know beforehand that your name is so common? Igor, Igor. Yeah, God. Okay. Last name. Vladimir Mova. Daniel. Okay. Common one. Still not here. Boss. Peak. Natisha. Still not here. Is she doing Japan stuff? Just doesn't come. Yeah. But I know that. Does she attend other classes? No. Well, I mean, I guess you won't see her next year. Okay, Alvin. I think he's doing the Japan stuff, right? So that's fine. Chayapat. Bin ครับแค่ BIN Sun behind Han okay Phil Carmen oh you knew what's the Carmen where were you on Monday and Carmen where Where were you on Monday and Wednesday?
I did not know.
You didn't know. You were not aware that this was a lecture? Did you have the class schedule? Who told who told you that? Who told you that? In this room? I never told anyone that so I don't know who how you get this idea. It's not done. สอนธนวัฒน์แขกเพชร ET this ยกโอเคLuis ยกโอเคNo, just for me to keep track who's coming and who doesn't come. ไม่ผมแค่จดไว้เฉยไม่มีคะแนนแต่อาจจะมีคะแนนพิศวาสถ้าเห็นแบบไอ้คนนี้ไม่มาเลย แล้วดูจะตกก็ปล่อยตกเลย Okay, okay, let's continue with on Wednesday lecture, right? What did we learn? Yeah, now you can talk. What did we learn on Wednesday? What did we learn on Wednesday? Well, but that's very far. Before that, what did we learn before encapsulation? Class and object. What are the classes? What are the difference between classes and objects? Right. So, okay, good. Object that are made from classes. Why are people who are answering here are the one that wasn't there? Was it on Wednesday? What are people who were here on Wednesday? So the objects are created from the class, right? So class can produce many objects, right? So like the example that we learned is like we have a car class, right? Acting as a factory, where the car factory can build many car objects, right? Inside the class and object, what do we have for the components? We learn about components of class and object, right? What are the components? What does it have for each object? หมายถึงว่า object แต่ละ object มันมีอะไรบ้างที่เราเรียนกันมี3อย่าง we have three things, right? We learn three things for each object that attributes, right? Okay. What are the attributes? It's variable, right? It's a kind of state variable, right? It represents what kind of states each object have, right? Attributes for car, it can be color, right? Each car object has a color, right? But each object might have different color values, right? Okay. Speed, right? That we learn. Each car must have a speed, but at any point in time, right? The car object might have different speeds. The speed can change, right? What else? Weight, right? น้ำหนัก, right? The car objects might have different weights. Two cars might have different weights, right? Constructors. Why do we need constructor? What are the constructors to begin with? Like how to create an object, right, from a class. if you don't have constructor, then you cannot create an object, right? So it's a way for you to create an object. Okay. And lastly, methods, behaviors, right?
What can do?
Yeah, what can each object do, right? Even though they are the same objects, right? The same types of car, the behavior might be different, right? Some cars might like now you might drive the car, right? Driving could be behavior, braking could also be a behavior, right? So it can be anything, right? Okay. For the class, can it have multiple attributes? Can you have multiple attributes? Right? You can have one and one, right? You can have colors, you can have speed, you can have weights, right? What about constructors? Can you have multiple constructors? Yes, right? Constructors, because there might be different ways to create an object, right? But then for multiple constructors, what are the requirements for the multiple constructors? If you have two constructors and the same input argument, would it work? No, right? So it has to be differentiated by the input arguments, right? Either the type or the number, right? You can have one single argument constructor, right? But both of them, for example, the first constructor takes the string as an input. The second one takes integer as an input. That is valid, right? But you cannot have the same constructor. You cannot have two constructors that both take the string as input, right? Lastly, methods. You can also have multiple methods, right? We also look into how we declare attributes, right? Start with visibility, right? Public, private. The type of the attribute, int, string, double, or it can be a class as well. Okay, that I think when you do the lab one, you have to sometimes define attribute as a class. Okay. Lastly, the attribute name, right? What's private? What's public? Okay. Right? You understand? You understand what she said? So the private, when you declare attribute private, right, it means that this private attribute is private. It can only be accessed. It can be read. It can be written inside the class declaration, right? Which means inside this bracket. It cannot be read. It cannot be written outside the class at all. And we learned a little bit about final, right? Final, when you declare a variable to be final, it means that that variable can be assigned once. Once it's assigned with a value, you cannot change the value, right? It's final. Once you assign with the value, it's final. Which means it's a constant, right? Once you set the value, it becomes constant. What do you do in constructor in Java? So the way you declare constructor, right? You make sure that you declare as a method, right? It's the same way you declare a method, right? You put the method name, which has to be the same name as the class name. Okay? You can take input arguments. It can have functionality inside the constructor, right? In here, you assume that we assume that it takes one input argument of type string. Okay. Right. You can declare different constructor if you want with different type. That's fine, right? It depends on what you want. But in this case, I want to take an input argument from the user, right? Representing the color of the car. and I will initialize the car object with that color, right? This is the code here, right? I take the argument here from the user, initialize the attribute color with this thing, all right? And I initialize other attributes with this value, 0 and 1000, okay? How do you call a constructor? How do you create an object? You follow this format, right? You declare first you declare variable that you hold the object, right? With the type of the class type, car, right? Say it's my car variable of type car, and then you do this, right? Equals new keyword. It must be there, right? It will say that you want to create an object. Without new, Java will know, right? You have to say new so that Java will know that you want to create a new object, right? And then you have to follow the constructor, right? In this case, the constructor has to be the same as the class, right? Car, and it takes one input argument from here, right? Takes one input argument of string, right? So that's why you have to follow that, right? You can only put one argument, and that would be string. Okay. After this, you can have a my car object, right? With the color being green. And speed is 0, and the weight is 1000 double. Okay, we learned about that. We also talk about if you declare the attributes to be private here, right? Once you try to access attributes in a different class, it will fail. It will not run. You can try it, it will not run, right? It cannot compile. Make sense? But if you declare it public, then you can access it, no problem, right? Again, important thing, practical things inside in Java. If you create one file, that file has to be the same name as the class name, right? So if you want to have a class called garage, you should create a new file called garage.java. Okay. Same thing. If you want to have a class named car, just create a file named car.java. And inside the class, it should only have one class. So inside a Java file, it should only have one class only. It should not have multiple classes. That is a valid use case to have multiple classes, but most of the time you will not need it in this course. Okay. Again, one file, one class. Don't put too many classes into a single file, right? And the name of the file has to be the same name as the name of the class. Talk a little bit about the convention, right? When I say I talk briefly about convention in Java. Basically, you guys remember the word convention? Convention. What does convention mean? Seems like you're right. It's just like how people normally do things. Right? How people agree on things, right? Okay, sure. So, I mean, you can be an odd duck if you want, right? You can be like the outlier to do something weird. But typically, what people would do when they want to name the class, they always start with a capital letter. Always, okay. Garage always capital G. Car always capital C. For naming the variable, including attributes, the first letter has to be a lowercase, always. Okay. Same thing for the methods. If you want to name the method, you always start with a lowercase g, the lowercase, right? But if the name of the method consists of multiple words, for example, here, right, it was 2 words, it gets speed, right? The subsequent words, right, the word that's not the first word, always start with the capital letter. Okay.มันเป็น convention ครับคนทำอย่างนี้กันซึ่งคนอาจจะต้องทำง่ายๆก็ Okay. Typically, that's how people write Java. If you write in C or C++, you do it differently, right? In C, you would do something like get underscore speed. So you separate the word by underscore. But in Java, you separate by using capital letter. When you declare methods, how do you declare methods here? Visibility. The type that you return, right? After you call this method and the name. What about static? Do you need static? Yeah. So in here, right? No. For now, no. We will learn when you need static today. Okay. But before that, right? That you guys learn in the first 5 weeks, you always use static, right? There's a reason for that. But for now, if you think about object stuff, right? If you want to write object or the programming, and then if that method is specific to the object, you don't use static, right? If it's specific to this specific object, right? Don't use static. We talk about why the reason why we don't want to put attribute to be public, right? We want to declare all attributes to be private and use the concept of encapsulation to make sure that the only way that you can modify the attribute values is through a specific method, right? Because why? Because if you declare attribute as a public, right? Someone else can create an object of class, right? And set the weight to be whatever values he wants. Correct? Right? Like this guy, right? If I create a new class, create a new object, I can set the weight to minus 1,000. But this is not a valid weight, right? In your code, if you write your code, you want to protect your code. You may not want to have a class object with negative weights, right? And when they do that, right, this is not good. That's why you don't want to expose the variable or the attributes to be private. Okay? Makes sense? อันนี้คือคนอื่นมาเขียนโค้ดเราจะเขียนอะไรก็ได้ถูกไหมเขาสร้าง object ขึ้นมาเขาเซ็ตเป็นเงินครบ 1,000 ไงทำไมจะไม่ได้ถูกไหมเพราะเราการ public กันถูกไหมใช่ public ก็คือเขียนอ่านได้แต่คนอื่นสามารถเขียนอ่านได้แต่เราไม่ต้องการเงินคนเราถ้าเป็นลบ 1,000 โค้ดเรามาเอาจริงกับผิดถูกไหมOkay, now I suppose you understand the problem. So that relates to the concept of encapsulation, right? When you do encapsulation, you want to guarantee that all attributes are private. First of all, do you guys know the word encapsulation? Encapsulation, it means in capsule. Do you know capsule? That's right. So it means you want to encapsulate, make a capsule, right? Make a capsule around the attributes and method. This means that the only way, right, when you want to create a capsule around it, it means that no one else can access the attribute directly without going through the method, right? So the only way that they want to modify the attributes, you have to invoke the method. And from there, you implement the method to protect your attributes, right? Since the method, you can write whatever code you want, right? You write the code to protect your attributes. For example, right? You want to make, so in this case, well, what you typically would do is to set attribute to be private first. But if you set just the attribute to be private without having the method, right, then no one else can access at all. You want to expose getter and setter method, allowing other people to get and set, right? Get means read the attribute value. Set means modify the attribute value to a new value, right? And from there, inside the getter and setter, you can implement the logic to protect your attributes. For example, in your getter, right, you are okay to give the other people the value of the weight. So you don't have to write anything, right? Just return the weight attribute. That's fine, right? But setter, right? Okay, sorry, I forgot again. Yeah, for setter, I implement set weight, right? Take the new weight as the input argument. And now I don't want to modify the weight attribute, right? If the input is not zero, if it's less than 0. If the input weight is invalid, I don't want to update the weight attribute, right? This is something I want, right? So to do that, I can write the code this line, right? If the input weight is more than 0, I set my weight attribute to W. If not, I do that. Okay? So you can imagine, like, you can put any kind of access control code there to protect your attributes. And this is one example. Okay? So we talk about the fully encapsulate. So the class is fully encapsulated if you make all attributes not public, right? You never declare attribute to be public. Okay, and that is called fully encapsulated. We talk about some consistency issue, right? Where maybe you define the name, the same name for the input argument as the same name for the attribute. Then when you do that, right, then Java wouldn't know which one corresponds to which, right? This line, right? It doesn't know which color, this color corresponds to this guy or this guy, right? Same thing here, right? This color corresponds to this guy or this guy, right? So Java wouldn't know. To differentiate it in Java, if you are referring to attribute, right, you can use this dot attribute name. Okay. And in this case, Java will know that this color actually is the attribute of this object, right, which is a car object. So if you associate this variable into this guy, right, and since this one has no association with this, it will associate it with the input argument, right? Because that's the only choice left. Same thing for method, right? If you want to be explicit, right, saying that this I want to call this method, you can also do this method name as well. When you do this, it will call this method, right? Which has the same effect as this guy, right? If you don't use this, it's also doing the same thing. The interesting part is you can also use this to call another constructor. Okay, what does this do? What does, oh, I probably should. What does this line do? This black. I want to see it from 4 of you. What does this line do? What does it do? What does it do? Huh? Huh? Which method or which constructor would we call? If you call this constructor, right? The first constructor, right? So it's a way for a constructor to call another constructor, right? Okay. Make sense? So essentially, this one saying that I want to reuse the constructor code, right? I want to reuse this code where I assign the current color to black, right? So if the user applies, give me no input argument, I will set the default color to black, right? And this has the same effect as so that right? They're the same thing. And you save 2 lines, right? So you avoid code duplicate by doing that. Okay, right? I think you have to use it in the lab as well, right? Okay. So this will help prevent code duplication inside the constructor, right? So you can avoid code duplication in multiple constructors by using the concept of this, right? To call another constructor from one constructor. Okay, that's where we left off on Wednesday, right? So we will continue. Okay. So another concept that I want to focus is called overloading. You guys know the word overloading? Overload. In any case, when we say overloading, it means that overloading can apply and can be applied to method and constructor. When methods are overloaded, it means that method you can have multiple methods with the same name, right? And for constructor, right? You can have multiple constructors, but constructor has no name anyway. So you can, this means you can have multiple constructors, which we already do know, right? It works, right? You can have multiple constructors as long as they are differentiated by the input arguments. Same thing for method overloading. You can have multiple methods with the same name as long as they are differentiated by the input arguments. Okay. What do I mean? If I create a class for calculator, right? I may want to have multiple multiply methods, right? That takes different input arguments, right? It may take 2 input arguments of int, right? And return x times y, or it may take 3 input arguments and return x times y times z, right? These are valid, right? Even though they have the same name, but they have different input arguments. So you're good, okay? Same thing here, right? You can have the same name, same input argument number, right? You have 2 input arguments, same thing here, but the types are different. It's also valid to do that. Okay. Same thing here. You have 2 input arguments, right? But they have different types from these 2, right? All 3, right? Have different input types. So all of them are valid. You can do that. This is called method overloading, right? You can overload the methods with the same name, right? As long as they are different in terms of input arguments, you are okay. But the problem is, oops, can I have 2 methods with the same name, same input arguments, but different return value? You think it would be a valid choice? Yes, no, why? Why not? This one is these things are valid, right? Because Java can tell the difference, right? Can tell the difference between each method, even though they all have the same name, right? But you can tell by the input arguments, right? They have different input arguments, so they can tell which one to call. What about this guy? They have some difference, right? The output arguments are different. So would it work? Does it work? Why? No, wait, no. No, but here, right, there is still some difference, right? But the difference is not based on the input, but it's based on the output, right? From what you see, you can see the difference, right? Int and double. Yeah, and you convert to double. Why not it works, right? Would this work in Java? Well, I can tell you the answer. The answer is no, because the way you write the code in Java, right? Even though the methods have the return value, you don't have to assign the return value, right? It's optional when you write the code, right? You can write this code. Okay, and it's perfectly valid. It is not a good practice to do. It's a valid line code, right? But when you do this, right, how can you tell the difference? How can Java know which one to call? They cannot tell, right? Yeah, so that's why if the difference is only the return type, that doesn't work. It's not method overloading. Method overloading works only for multiple methods with the same name, but having different input arguments. Okay. Okay. So I think I will skip that. So I want to go to the next concept. So I want to continue. I want to finish this concept called reference data types. All right. Have you heard about reference data types? Have you heard about reference? What about type? In Java, there are three main types. One of them is called primitive type. The other one is called reference type. And the last one is a special type, which is called noun. Now you can just think of now as the black hole. It's like a special case. It shouldn't exist. It is used to define the not valid thing, right? If you want to declare something not valid, you would use noun. All right. We will see when to use it. But primitive type, I suppose you guys are already familiar with it. Correct? Boolean, byte, short, int, long, char, float, double. You're familiar with them? Good, right? So this is one type that you learn in the first 5 weeks. This is the one that we will talk about is reference type. Okay. And you will see there are 4 main things. Class, we already learned it, right? Class. In here, already. You guys already learned it, right? Enum interface, you haven't learned it, but they have the same concept, which we will dive into that. Do you guys know what happened when you declare a variable as a this one? What does computer see in this variable? How does the computer store this variable? Huh? Yeah, so you will find a space inside the memory. Wait, first of all, when we talk about computer, you guys know about the memory, RAM? RAM? Do you know what RAM is? RAM, RAM. Are you sure? Hey, U4, do you know RAM? RAM. When you have computer, right? You can think computer as the as a calculator. Computer is calculator. It performs some operation. It can add numbers. It can multiply numbers, right? Okay. But computer, if you can just add and multiply numbers, they're not very useful because you may want to store the computation results, right? You want to store the addition somewhere and use it later, right? So you need some space to store the results, right? You need some space to store some results, and the space that you store the result is RAM. That's why you have like if your computer has more RAM, it means that it can keep more intermediate results. It can keep more browser data, right? It can open more applications, right? Because the application will need storage, right? And that will be stored in RAM. Okay? Make sense? So the RAM is, you have to think of the memory, right? It's the memory of computer, right? It is used to temporarily store the data for computation, right? It is not a permanent memory. It doesn't store the data permanently, right? The part that stores data permanently is the what? What's the component that stores data permanently? RAM, solid, temporary. You know what the word temporary? ชั่วคราว. But if you do it right, then you lose access after some time. What if you want to store a file? The game, right? You want to keep it for a long time. Drive, right? So you use drive SSD to store it permanently, right? But in any case, right? Yeah. So we will talk about RAM only, right? Because whatever the code that you write there, it will be in RAM because it will need to be stored, right? And to and what yeah, okay. So what happens when you declare this kind of code? See, your computer will try to find available space in RAM, right? And associate that memory, that available space with the number 20, right? It will store the value of age to be 20, right? Make sense? This is what happened for primitive type. All the primitive types, this is what computer do. Both, it will do the same thing, find a new available memory and put the actual value there, right? Boolean, it will find a new available memory and put 0 or 1 there. But when we talk about reference types, what happens is when you declare a variable to be a reference type, your computer does not store the actual value on that variable anymore. What it does here is it will put the actual value somewhere else. And in that variable will hold the address to that actual value. Okay, this may look weird, right? Let's see the if I represent this, you can imagine, right? This is the RAM, right? So RAM has two parts. Okay. When I declare age to be 20, right? The computer will find the available slot, right? And say that this slot will go to age variable. And inside this slot, it will put 20. This makes sense. This makes sense, right? But what if I do this, right? If I create an array of integers with 3 elements, what happened in the computer is that it will create the array somewhere else first, 12, 30, 25. But this part is not exactly the age array. What it does inside computer is it will create a new memory for age array where this memory holds the address to this object. Okay, Does it make sense? You hold the back. Are you sure? If I ask you to repeat, can you do that? Right? Age, it holds 20, right? The actual value. Age array, it doesn't hold the actual array, right? It holds the address to the array. You guys know the word address?ที่อยู่
Yes. I know.
You tell me. So essentially, like this value will point into the array, right? It doesn't hold the array itself. It holds the pointer to the array. Array address, right? Think about your home address, right? If your home address is yeah, so think about if your home address is at 200,000, right? This is your home, 200,000, right? So the edge array, yeah, it doesn't store the actual home. It doesn't contain the home, your home object, right? What it does is contain your home address, 200,000. So if you want to have access to the actual object, you have to go through this address, go there and access it. Make sense?
Okay.
Make sense?อันนี้คือผมฟังที่น้ำโมบอกครับที่อยู่อิสระเป็นที่อยู่เป็นตำแหน่งของตัว array คอมพิวเตอร์มันไปสร้าง array ที่ตำแหน่งตรงนี้ 200,000 ถูกไหมครับแต่ว่าตอนที่ประกาศ variable edge array อ่ะ edge array อ่ะมันจะไม่ถือตัว object ตัวจริงๆมันจะไปถือตัว address ของตำแหน่งอันนี้ถูกไหมเพราะฉะนั้นถ้าจะ access ตัว object จริงๆอ่ะเราต้องดูที่อยู่ตรงนี้แล้วตามไปที่อยู่ถูกไหมเราต้องตามไปถึงที่อยู่นั้นถึงจะ access ได้ซึ่งจะว่าเป็นการให้อัตโนมัติเราจะไม่เห็น as a user if you want to access the actual object Java will automatically get it for you automatically but under the hood this is what happened okay same thing for string now you should know by now string is a class right? Because it started in a capital S. Someone else create a class for string for you, and you use it, right? If you create a new string called name with the value of, so the name variable will not hold the actual string value. It will not hold the string of. The string of will be created somewhere else, and the string name variable. It will hold the address to this string object. Okay. Before I move forward, I want to make sure everyone understand. Understand?อะไรนะครับไปทำไหนไม่นี่คือตัวอย่างครับ Same thing if you create an object, right? You declare a variable called C, parse C, right? The location where C is created, it doesn't hold the object. It holds the address to the actual object, right? The object is created somewhere else, and this one will hold the address. 4 คนข้างหลังได้ไหมเนี่ยเข้าใจไหม You three, okay? Good. Why do we talk about this? Why do you have to learn this thing? What happens if you do this? If you create a new object or car blue and assign it to the same variable C. What happened? Why not? Huh? What happened? Before that, what if I do age? If I do age equals 100, what would happen? Huh? Yeah, I run it after age equals 20. What happened? It will change from here, right? You will see, this address, this memory, right, for the value of the age, it will replace 20 with 100. Right? Yeah. What happened here? First, when you do this, right, you create a new car object. Say, right, and create a new object, right? What happened to the C value? Currently, C holds the address to the old object, right? What happened when you do this? It will change this address, right? Not pointing to here, it points to here. Okay. Make sense? Right? So instead of it changed the value of 100,000 into a different address. You see, right? They are different, right? If it's for primitive data type, you just change the actual value inside the variable. But for the reference type, you change the pointer, you change the address. This means the old object is still there. Okay. Example for string, right? When you declare string, if you declare it without the initial value, it will find the computer will find the space in RAM, right, to allocate it for that variable S1. No value. Naturally, it has no value. It doesn't point to anywhere, right? But if you declare as this, right, S2 equals hello, what it does is it will create a string object hello, right? And it will assign S2 with the address point to hello. Okay. You also can create it as the object-oriented style, right? For string, new string and the actual string value for test. When you do that, it do the same thing, right? Create a test object, associate the S3 to this object. What happens if you do string S4 equals S2? What would be the value of S4 here? It will copy the value in here to S4, right? And what's the value in here? The pointer to hello, right? It's not the hello itself, it's the pointer to hello, right? So it will copy the address of hello into S4. At this point, S4 will point to hello, right? So now you may notice, right? You can have two ways to do it. Or create a new object for string, right? You can assign with the string quote and quote, right? Like that. But when you do this, we have this inside the code, right? What Java does is it will check first whether you have the same object or not. If you already have the test object, it will not create a new object. It will give you the address of the object to use. But if you do this, it guarantees to give you a new object, right? If you do this, even if the object test happened before, right? Let's say, right, you do S test and S1 test, right? S and S1 will point into the same object, but S2 will always create a new object for that. Okay. Now, all before this, right? That I mentioned is for this thing. What happened to this code? What happened to this code? What is the Boolean value of B0 and B1? B0 is true. Oh. Okay, other people? Different. B0 is true or false? True. Why? B0 is true. What of B1? Oh. Why B1 is false? Huh? Yeah. When you do equality check, right? You check whether S1 and S2 are equal, right? But S1 and S2 hold the address, right? Even though the actual object have the same value, the address are different, right? So that's why S1 and S2 are different. This one will be false. B1 is false. B0 is true, right? Because they point to the same object, right? The address that they hold are the same. This is the reason why if you want to do the string comparison, you should always do dot equals, right? If you want to compare whether two strings have the same string value or not, you shouldn't do equal, you should do dot equals in Java because of this reason. Okay, makes sense? Okay, let's take maybe 10 minutes break and then we'll come back. Okay, come back on 47. Break, top break. 10 นาที
Thank you.
While we're waiting, how's the lab? How likely is it that you can finish it by Sunday? You need extension? No, you don't need. Until when? Until when? How many questions have you done now? Two? The problem with extension is when I grant extension, you guys not gonna do it until the last day, right? That's always the case. That's not you guys, maybe previous students. They're not always, they're just gonna wait until the last day to do it anyway. Can you give me promise that you will keep doing, not waiting until the last day? Okay. So I'll make it due by Tuesday. Up. Tuesday works.
มันได้ความเป็นเยอะ
สองมันได้สี่ข้อ
ตอนที่สองที่มันได้ข้อเยอะมันได้ข้อเยอะแต่มันโฟกัสในโฟกัสในเรื่อง
Well, we can discuss at the end of today's class. Okay.
เรียกใครอยู่เรียกเท่าไหร่แล้วก็งานจำต่อ
อย่างนี้
เก่งมากแค่เขา
แบบนี้เนี่ยเกียร์เขาพูดเองนะเรียนต่างกันเลยเรียนได้หลายแต่แน่นอนใช่นี่อย่างเดิมเราก็ต้องไปแจ้งก่อนอันนี้ไม่ได้ปีนี้ครับปีท้ายเจ็ดปีไปอาจารย์มาเลยนะรู้เจ็ดปีที่อ่านวิชาอะไรถึงแล้วก็ดูวิชาอะไรโอเคโอ้มาแล้วก็จากแค่จะดูอาจารย์เล่นไหมใช่ใช่เดี๋ยวปอมไม่ได้ก็ไม่ได้เนี่ยแกงตั้งตอนดู use AI เล่นเลย use code ตั้งแต่เราถึงตรงนี้ใครอยากเรียนก็ได้บอมไม่ได้ผมเป็นคนเก่งเท่าไหร่เล่นไลน์ สร้างให้เขาเวลาทำงานเราไปทำเสร็จที่นั้นมันก็ว่าเอสซีกับเอสซอนแล้วก็เดียวกันวางแต่ว่าทำงานการแข่งยุทธเราต้องแค่กว่าประมาณเอสซีแต่ตอนนี้พวกเองแล้วก็ในทางเดินหน้าออกเอสเอาไปคออย่างนี้เป็นทั้งสองมือเองอะไรสองมันจะสองที่จะรู้ฟรีสแล้วก็งานเจ็บเพราะว่าเป็นข้าวเป็นเองแต่สองต้องเชื่อมเชื่อมหน้าบางเองเป็นสองเชื่อมในซึ่งเอสเอาหนังสือใช่แต่ตอนที่มันแบบไม่รู้อย่างนี้ถึงจริงๆสินค้าเนี่ยเป็นสมองวัดเนี่ยมันจะเป็นตามนั้นเพราะฉะนั้นสิ่งที่สองมันคือสอง object ไม่เป็นแบบเขาจะบอกตั้งค่ามันจะตัวเป็นพวกมันจะเป็นอย่างนี้แต่ว่าไปคอมเมนต์การพวกต้องไปเชียร์นะต้องสร้างเสียงอะไรที่มันได้เป็นเอสอะไรที่พวกเส้นไม่สอนที่มันว่าไม่เกิดสร้างขึ้นมาเป้าหมายมันคือเช็คค่าสปริงข้างในไม่ได้เช็คว่ามันเป็น object ตัวฝั่งงานมันจะใช้มันจะเช็คแล้วมันจะเช็คค่าสปริงของไปตัวนั้นซึ่งไปก็จะได้เยอะแล้วมีเยอะแบบไม่ใช่กับเบสแต่อีกพวกแบบนั้นคือไม่ถึงเป็นจุดเพื่อไปเช็คเป็นข้อต่อจริงจริงถ้าพี่ยังไม่ยุบเลยเนาะพี่ก็ได้ยินทุกคนก็ว่าการอันที่ว่ามันเสร็จนั่นเดียวต่อมาที่ต้องก็เป็นข้อตัวอะไรกัน
กลับบ้าน Okay. Go back to your seat. โอเค move back. So the next concept that I want to talk about is something called immutable object. Talk ตลอดเวลานะฮะ private มันไม่เห็นไม่ใช่เหรอ private ก็คือคนอื่นไม่สามารถเข้าถึงได้ถูกไหมแต่ตัวมันเองอ่ะมันเปลี่ยนได้ถูกไหมถ้าไม่ตั้ง private เดี๋ยวค่อยคุยกันเดี๋ยวนั้นเดี๋ยวผม cover ให้แต่ว่าถ้าตามปัจจุบันอ่ะเราควรต้องตั้งทั้ง private หรือ public แต่ตอนนี้ผมบอกว่าห้ามตั้ง public ถูกไหมเพราะฉะนั้นเราตั้ง private โอเคใช่แต่ว่า private เปลี่ยนค่าโดยคนอื่นไม่ได้ถูกไหมเปลี่ยนได้แบบในคลาสตัวเองเท่านั้นแต่ final บอกว่าตัวเองก็เปลี่ยนไม่ได้โอเคHello resume now resume so we talk about constant for attributes, right? What about immutable object? If you want to create an object that is immutable, first of all, what is the word? What is the meaning of immutable? Immutability. What does it mean? Yeah, you don't have to go back to your computer. Yeah, can you get your friend to answer? What's immutable? What's immutable object? You know the meaning?คงที่หมายความว่าไงคงที่ cannot be changed, right? So what does it mean by immutable object? Boss? Hello? What's immutable object? When you create a new object, right? A car object in Java, that object can be modified, right? It's okay to modify the object, but sometimes you want the object, once you manufacture it, once you produce it, to be unmodifiable, right? This is called immutable object. Okay, makes sense? Once you produce the immutable object, you cannot change it, right? How do you do that in Java? One example for immutable object is string, right? String. Once you create a string object for a specific string value, you cannot change it. How do you do it? How do you change things in objects? What do you mean by changing things in objects? When you to change something, right? In objects, what does it mean? You change the object attributes, right? That's the only thing you can change, right? Inside object, the color, right? You can change the color from one color to another color, right? If you don't want that object to be changed, you want all the attributes to be what? Unchangeable, right? Not modifiable, constant, right? If you don't want the object to be changed, what you do here is to make sure that all attributes are constant, right? After you assign the initial value. To do that, you put the final for all attributes, right? This is what happens in string, right? String is an immutable object. To enforce the immutability, what it does here is to put the final for all attributes, right? Inside the string object, it contains an array of characters and the count, the number of characters, right? And they put final there to make sure that once you produce a string object, you fill in the array, you fill in the count, you cannot change the object later. What do I mean? I say it cannot be changed, but you can do this, right? You can reassign S. Let's say first you set S to test, right? You can change it test to test2. But doesn't this count as changing the object? Yeah, that's a change. No, right? It doesn't change the actual object. It changed the reference, right? It changed the reference from pointing to this guy to another new guy, right? You don't change the object. You just create a new object and change the reference to the new object. The old objects do that. แล้วก็ชี้ไปที่ตัว for all the primitive types that you have learned, right? There are also the reference type equivalent for that as well. For int, you can make the reference type of integer using this type, integer with capital I. Okay. Same thing for bytes. You can use capital B to refer to the reference type of byte. Same thing for short, double, long Boolean character, and float. Again, the difference is once you declare it like this, the variable will hold the address of integer. It doesn't hold the integer itself, it holds the address of the integer. Right? Okay. Last thing I want to say is now. You heard about now? This now. Now is a special value that can be set into any reference type variable. For any reference type variable, it can be a value of now. Now means invalid, right? So yeah. So when you declare a reference type double or D and you set to now, right? D will hold the address of now, right? Yeah. Typically now you use it when something bad happened, right? When something bad happened, you set it to now so that someone else will resolve it later. What else? Now can be the default value if you want, but keep in mind that, right? Keep in mind for all the value, for all the reference type variable, it can be now. Right? What I'm saying, like now is perfectly fine to write it, right? You can write this. Yeah. Or you can write D equals 10 on D. That's also fine. Okay. Next thing, move on now to one last topic. Actually, maybe two more topics that I want to cover before we go to the lab. Static. This is the part that it can be confusing to some of you, right? When you declare attributes, right? For now, you don't declare it static. But in some case, static attributes are also valid thing to do, right? To understand that, right, you have to understand what the static attributes mean. Imagine if you create an attribute, right? Then, for example, attribute color, right? If you produce many cars, right? Each car may have different color value, right? You can have one attribute value for each object, correct? Right? Multiple objects may have different attribute value, right? But when you declare attribute to be static, it means that all objects will share the same attribute value, right? So if you declare two objects here, right? And you declare a static variable x, static attribute x, then the x value will be shared for two objects. You cannot have one value of x in object 1 and another value of x in object 2. Make sense? Yes. If you declare attribute to be static, it means that this attribute value, right, the actual value of this attribute will be the same for all objects. All objects will have the same value, right? This is different if you don't declare static, right? If you declare attribute to be not static, then each object might have different value for the attribute, right? In here, if you declare attribute x to be static, then if you try to access x from object 1, that value will be the same as object 2 x, right? If you don't declare it as a static, if you declare x as non-static, right? The x value in object 1 might be different from x value in object 2. Yes, right? So once you declare something, a variable to be or attributes to be static, that attribute is going to be shared for all the objects. You only have one single value for all the objects. ทุก object จะมีค่าเดียวถ้าเราประกาศ attribute เป็น static attribute นั้นจะมีแค่ค่าเดียวเรา access attribute อันนั้นใน object ไหนก็ตามมันก็จะมีค่าเดียวไม่มีค่าอื่นเลยแต่ถ้าเราประกาศ attribute ไม่ใช่ static object หนึ่งอาจจะมีค่า attribute ค่าหนึ่งอีก object หนึ่งอาจจะมีค่า attribute อีกค่าหนึ่งใช่ไหมเหมือน color ใช่ไหมสีเรา attribute มันเป็นไม่ใช่ static ใช่ไหม object หนึ่งจะมีสีหนึ่ง object อีก object หนึ่งจะเป็นอีกสีหนึ่งแต่เมื่อไหร่ก็ตามที่เราประกาศ attribute color ให้เป็น static ทุก object จะมีสีเดียวกันหมดเลยเราไม่สามารถมีหลายสีได้ sorry I speak Thai do you guys English speaking do you understand what I'm saying about static no when I declare attributes to be static what does it mean yeah I think you to understand what about in the back huh yeah mean static attributes right this means that the attributes the static attribute right when you declare some attribute to be static that attribute will have the same value for all the objects right whatever object you pick you always get the same value right non-static attributes you may have different value for different objects right why do we need that let's look at example first if I create a class for static graph test right and I want this attribute I to be static I would do what I would do here is to put static between public and int and that's it right this is how I declare I to be static okay how do I access static value what I can do is one way to do it I to create a new object right of type this type static bar test right and then access that attribute from the object right but if you actually recall that right all the objects will share the same value so this means that I don't think I will need to create a new object at all right so whatever object I created is going to have the same value that's why what you can do is to not create an object and just use the class name dot attribute static attribute and you can access it this is the same thing right this guy is the same thing as right? I create a new object called T, and I do T dot I. So bad. I do T dot I, right? I create an object, access attribute through the object, right? But then again, right? If you know that the static attribute is going to be the same, right? Whatever object you created, then you don't need to create an object to access it, right? There's no point to create a new object to do that. You just can access it through the class, right? By setting the class name dot attribute dot static attribute. Okay. Yeah, what happened to this time? What will be printed out? 5. Right. And I call it like, if I call it like 10,000 times, it's going to be fine, right? The question is, why do we need these static variables? Very good. Right? Imagine, we already learned, right? When you create a new object, you have to allocate a new memory location for the object, right? And if you don't use static, it means that you have to put the attribute for each object, right? But you know that the static value is static attribute going to have the same value, right? That will duplicate the same value many times, right? If you do static, you will remove duplication. Instead of putting static variables many times, you just put it once, right? Okay. And the common use case for static variables are class constants. For example, the car class, right? You know that all the cars that you want to manufacture, want to produce, is going to have 4 wheels, right? All the cars going to have 4 wheels, right? Then you can declare a number of wheels here as a static variable and also constant, right? Static constant, right? Then from there, if you want to access number of wheels, you can use car.numWheels, right? This line, right? Car.numWheels. It will give you 4. Or if you want, you can create a new object of car and access numWheels as the attribute of the car object as well. This one will also give you 4, right? Either way is fine, but since you know that this static attribute, right, is a constant, it's never going to be changed, it's going to be the same for all the objects. This is a much preferred way to do it, right? It's cleaner way, right? You can imagine static attributes is specific to the class now, not specific to the object, right? Okay. Static attributes ปกติ attribute แต่ละค่ามันจะมีค่าสำหรับแต่ละ object ถูกไหมครับแต่ถ้าเราประกาศ static attribute อะครับ static attribute อะมันจะมีค่าเดียวสำหรับทุก object ถูกไหมแสดงว่าในคลาสเดียวกันอะจะมีค่าเดียว static attribute ก็คือจะ specific กับ class แทนใช่ไหมไม่ใช่ specific กับ object นะ Not only constant that you can do with static attributes. What if you want to do bookkeeping, right, on the number of cars that you created, that you produce, right? You can declare it as a static attribute on the car class, right? And whenever you manufacture it, whenever you call a constructor, you can update this attribute, right? After you construct once, you increment it to 1. After you construct again, you increment it again, right? So what happens is you create 2 objects, C1 and C2, right? What happens when you do car.num created after you get right? Because you already every time you do constructor, you update the static attributes, right? Right? Even though there are 2 different constructors, but that is only a single static attribute, right? Right? Even though the car2 is a different object from car1, but this attribute is shared between car1 and car2 and car3, car4, car5, whatever, right? So when you do this, right, you're gonna get 2. Okay. And what happens if you do C1.numCard created? When you print it out, what is the value? After these two lines. One. Again, this one is shared for all the objects in the same class. Yeah, you print now card created. C1. V2. Again, now card created is shared for all the objects, right? After you create the first constructor, right? After you do the first constructor, now card created is updated to 1, right? But this now, what about the second constructor? It updated to 2.
Yeah.
What about this? Why do you get 1? You get 2. Right? Makes sense in the back? What's the back? ออกสอบนะ
ได้ก็มันไปเก็บค่าจะมาเก็บสมองได้
เราคิดว่า attribute ตัวเนี้ยทุก object มีค่าเดียวกันอย่างที่บอก ทุก object มีค่าเดียวกันถูกไหมพอเราไปเรียก constructor อันแรกครับ มันอัปเดตค่าเดียวกันตัวเนี้ยให้เป็น1ก่อน object ตัวที่2มันอัปเดตค่า attribute ตัวเนี้ยแต่ว่า attribute ตัวเนี้ยมันมีค่าเดียวสำหรับทุก object ถูกไหมจาก1เพราะฉะนั้นตอนเริ่มต้นก็คือ1พอ create ปุ๊บก็เป็น2ถูกไหมพอเราไปเรียกค่า attribute จาก object ตัวนั้นนะครับมันก็เป็นค่าล่าสุดที่เราอัปเดตไปก็คือ2ถูกไหมใช่ไหมแล้วถ้าผมทำ what if I do C2 now card created it's gonna be 2 right whatever object I do C1000 it's gonna be 2 at this point right okay again static variables are always shared between all objects, right? So you can associate static variable to the class, right? You only need one value for the class, right? What about static methods? Static methods. It's the same concept, right? Static variables, static attributes are shared between all objects. Static methods are also shared between all objects as well, right? Whatever object that you call on this method will always result in the same functionality, same behavior. It shouldn't be possible that you have two different return values by calling the same static method on different objects. Okay. Static methods are shared by all objects. Yeah. Okay. All objects always gonna have the same static method, right? This means that you can call the static method on any object, and that method will always gonna be return the same value. Okay. ปกติ method ของเราบางที method หนึ่งบน object หนึ่งมันจะ return อาจจะ return ค่าออกมาไม่เหมือนกันถูกไหมอย่างเช่นget speed ใช่ไหม method ค่าที่ get speed เราค่ารถของเรา speed อันหนึ่ง object หนึ่งเป็น0 object อีกอันหนึ่งเป็น10ใช่ไหม get speed คันแรกมันจะ return 0 get speed อันที่2จะ return 10ถูกไหมแต่ถ้าเราประกาศ get speed เป็น static นะครับobject ไหนก็ตามไปเรียก method นั้นจะได้ค่าออกมาเหมือนกันไม่มีค่าที่แตกต่างไม่มีค่าที่แตกต่างถ้าไม่ตอบเป็น static method static okay I just want to make sure non-type you understand static methods you're always going to get the same result for any invocation of the static methods on any object right This means that it doesn't matter if you create an object or not, right? You always gonna get the same result anyway. So you can actually call static method without creating an object, right? งงไหม static method อย่างที่บอกเรียกกับ object ไหนค่าออกมาเหมือนกัน เพราะฉะนั้น behavior ของ static method มันไม่ได้ผูกกับ object แล้วเพราะฉะนั้นเราไม่ต้องสร้าง object ก็ได้ถูกไหมในการเรียก This means that you can call the static method through the class the same way that you access static variable. You do car.print, right? If you have print with static method, that print. If you want to call this static method, you just do the class name and done static method. Okay? Right? You don't need to create a new object to do that. You can if you want to. That's fine. You can create a new object, class C, and do C.print. It's okay, but don't need to. All of these two are the same thing. Why do we need static methods then? Right? Static methods can be called without creating an object, right? You don't need an object to call static methods, right? Typically, you can use it for a utility class where you don't need the object to do some computation, right? Imagine the math class in Java. You guys have heard about Java math, right? Take maximum, minimum. I haven't used it. So Java provides a math library, math class, that gives you a method called max, square root, absolute value, right? But if you see, right, these guys, you don't need to create an object to do that. Okay, so yeah, you can do math.max, right? This one is the static method for math class. Okay, square root is a static method for math class. Absolute value is static method for math class, right? But if again, as a user, right, as a user, you just want to compute the max, right, between two numbers. You don't want to create a math object, right? Because I mean, it's useless, right? What you do is to call the static method on the math class, just this, without creating an object. Okay. Shorter, yeah, exactly. Okay, the interesting part is we have static methods, static variables. The question is, I guess the first question is, should static methods be able to access static attributes? What happens if static methods can access static attributes? Would it be okay? For example, I declare a static attribute called bar1, right? And I declare a static method called print1. Can bar1 be accessed inside print1? Yes, right? Because again, static methods and static attributes, you don't need. They have the same. Static attributes always share the same value for all the objects, right? And static methods. Okay. So yeah, basically you can do that. Okay. You can have static method access static attribute. Okay. Can static methods access non-static attributes? Can print2 declare static access bar2, which is not the static attribute. Again, static methods, right, should always return the same value for any object. Does value depend on the object? Val2 for one object might have one value, right? The other object might have different value. This means that if you allow this, then this static method will return different, will do different functionality, right? For different objects. Does it make sense? So if you allow this, then in some object, it will print both. In some object, it will print something else. But this is not what we want for static method, right? Static method always do the same thing for all objects, right? So this one shouldn't be allowed. And if you write that, it doesn't work in Java, okay? So static methods can only access static variables, static attributes, right? Static methods cannot access non-static attributes. Same thing for calling, right? Static methods can call another static method, right? Test, static method test can call another static method print. It's okay, right? Right? Because you guarantee that this static method, right, is going to be the same for all the objects, right? This guarantee that this method is going to be the same for all the objects too. Okay. But static methods cannot call non-static method, right? Because if it can, let's see, right? In this case, the non-static method print the color of the color attribute of the object, right? Which depend on the object, right? Multiple objects might have different behavior, right? But if you allow the static method to call the non-static method print color here, then the behavior will depend on this, right? And it might be different for different objects. Okay, so static methods cannot call non-static methods, right? So the rule of thumb is static methods can only access static attributes and can only call other static methods, right? You cannot do anything non-static at all inside static method. That is why when you declare main as a static method, right, you cannot call non-static method inside main, right? You cannot call print color directly inside main, okay. Right? You can call test inside main. This is the reason why all beforehand, like all 5 weeks that you do that, you always declare all the methods static to make sure that the main method, which is static, can call it. Yeah. Right? Because like you can go back to your old code, right? Remove the static method and try to call it with the main, it doesn't work. Okay. Okay, last thing, so that you can go to the lab. Enumerate enum. Have you guys learned enum? Wait, no. Didn't you take last year? No, yeah, you. Oh, your first time? What did you do last year? What did your second year, right? Oh, you weren't here. Ah, okay. Same for all of you? Only 2? Only 1? Okay. Let's talk about enum. Enum stands for enumeration. One key word is that enum is also a reference type. Okay, keep this in mind for now. Enum you can think of enum is a special type, when type special, that is used to define a group of constants, not just a single constant, a group of constants that have the same pattern. For example, if you want to write a method inside the car class to perform the action based on traffic lights, right? Let's see. The method is see traffic lights. What happened? The method is see traffic lights, right? That takes the input argument that indicates the traffic light, right? And I check whether the color is red, right? Red is constant, right? And declare red as constant, public static final int, right? Red to be 0, yellow to be 1, green to be 2, right? Okay. Then I can check by testing the color here, right? If the color is the same as red, then you stop. Else, if the color is yellow, you slow. Else, if the color is green, you drive. But what's wrong here? What's the problem? Is this code good? Not good.
Public static void.
Public static void. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. So no, actually, your observation is good, but I forgot to say that for the non-static method can access static attributes. Yeah. Right. So this one can access static attributes. That's fine. Think about right. Yeah. Okay. So that's not a problem, right? So this one can access is okay. Yeah, I'm sorry to say that. I'm sorry to forget to say that. So let's go back a little bit. So if you have a non-static method, then this non-static method can access static attributes. It even can call static method as well. Okay. The reasoning you can just go back to see, right? The static methods is shared by all the objects, right? Then if you have a non-static method which depend on the object, then it doesn't break anything to call static methods or access static attributes. But I will leave this as exercise for you to do. But keep in mind, right? Non-static method can call static attributes, can access static attributes and can call static methods. Okay, go back to this. What do I do now? So what's the problem? I write a method so that it takes the input argument of type color, of integer that represents the color, right? If the color is 0, it's red. If the color is 1, it's yellow. If the color is 2, it's green. What happens if the user put 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? It's error, right? So how do you handle error? It's going to be very hard to handle error, right? Huh? Give it false. Now, that could be the way, right? But the better way is to make sure that there will be no error. To do that, you can use enum to limit that instead of integer can be ranging from more than 2, right? You can use enum to limit that the input argument is going to be either 0, 1, or 2. How do you do that? You declare a new class called lightcolor.java. you do it similarly as how you define a class, right? You do public, but instead you do public class, you do public enum and light color. Inside there is a group of constants. Okay. So when you declare like this, right? You declare a new type for light color, and the only possible value for light color is either red, green, or yellow, and that's it. No other values except this color. Okay. So how do I modify my code? Instead of I put int color, I replace int with my new type, light color, right? And this will force the user to supply the color that has this type, right? And inside this type, you guarantee that the color is only either red, yellow, or green, right? So you don't have to handle the array. Okay. To access the red, you do again red. You can access as the static variable. Light color but red, light color but yellow, light color but green. That's it, right? Nice, much nicer. Okay, makes sense. Does it make sense? Does it make sense? อธิบายให้เป็นภาษาไทยนิดนึงแทนที่เราจะประกาศตรงเนี้ยเราประกาศไฟสีแดงสีเหลืองเขียวเป็น constant ถูกไหมแต่การประกาศอย่างเนี้ยใช่ไหมพอเราเช็คอะครับในโค้ดเนี่ยเราเช็คเราก็ไม่สามารถเช็คค่าที่มากกว่า2ได้ถึงนั้นเองเพราะฉะนั้นถ้าเกิดคนเขาพาสค่ามากกว่า2ขึ้นมาเราก็เขียนโค้ดเพิ่มที่จะ support ตัวเคสนี้นะคือทำ error handling แต่ว่าเราไม่อยากใช้ตรงนี้วิธีที่ดีกว่าคือเราลิมิตว่า input ที่มันมีมามันเป็นในรูปของ constant ใช่ไหมถ้าเราลิมิตได้ว่า input ที่เขาสร้างที่เราใส่มาครับอยู่ในกลุ่มของ constant ได้ครับเพราะเรามีข้อตรงนี้นะวิธีการทำกลุ่มของ constant นะครับก็คือการใช้ enum ประกาศ enum ออกมาชื่อ type ของ enum เป็นชื่อ class เนอะคิดซะว่า enum ก็คือ special class ที่มี constant แค่3ตัวไม่มี method ไม่มี constructor ไม่มีอะไรข้างในมี constant 3ตัวซึ่งการประกาศ constant ตัวก็คือชื่อ constant แต่ละตัวไปพอมากพออย่างนี้เราประกาศแล้วว่าเราประกาศ enum ที่เป็นชื่อ light color ที่มี constant 3ตัวคือ red green yellow แล้วเวลาที่เราจะโค้ดปัจจุบันโค้ดเป็นอย่างที่เปลี่ยนจาก each เป็น light color แทนถูกไหมเราก็การันตีได้เลยว่าเวลาคนเรียกครับคนไม่สามารถเรียกค่า color ที่นอกเหนือ1 ใน 3นี้ได้เพราะเราประกาศแล้วว่า color เนี่ยมันมีค่าได้แค่3ค่าเท่านั้นถูกไหมโอเคเพราะฉะนั้นเราก็สามารถสร้างโลจิกเพื่อทำเช็คว่าเป็นสีแดงหรือเปล่าใช่ไหมเช็คว่าเป็นสีเหลืองหรือเปล่าเช็คว่าสีเหลืองหรือเปล่าก็พอแล้ว So enum is a nice way for you to define a group of constants, right? So that's the powerful way to do. Okay. Enum in Java is still a reference type. So the constant there are also the reference type, right? So if you declare C1 as an enum, right? I color C1. C1 will hold the address point to the object rate, the constant rate. Okay. Same thing, right? If you do C2 dot rate, C2 will hold the address to object rate. But unlike any other reference type data, since enum is already a global constant, they will not create a new object for the same rate. You cannot have rate with 2 objects or 3 objects. You're always going to have only one red, one green, and one yellow. Okay. Done. Okay, so any questions? What did we learn today? That's the last thing that we learned. Oh, you want to answer? Okay. Give me one thing that you learned today. Not Enum. Something else. Not Enum. Give me something that you learned today. Hey, talk to me. Yeah. What did you learn today? Static method. What's static method?พูดเหมือนกับว่าว่าไงฮะ What's the answer?